Hi, Joe Cerrone.
Al Rosen.
Welcome to our weekly Zoom meeting, and this is our last assignment, Chapter 12, Creating Presentation Layouts and Making a Sheet Set. So with that, we have the book information, Chapter 12, Presenting Layouts Tenant Space Project. And if you click on that, you'll get the information and the learning objectives. And so the idea in this chapter is to create layouts and to create viewports set to scale and locked, and then to use the viewport layer properties so that we can make certain layers visible within the viewports and certain layers not visible. And then some of the other commands that are useful are things like this MV setup that'll allow us to set up multiple views and to be able to go through these layout wizards and sheet sets. Okay, with that, if we come back here to the home page, what you want to do is you want to download the student file. And so if you click on student file and you download that and you open it, you will see the tenant space floor plan in model space. And this X reference is just a warning. So we're going to ignore it's looking for a file that it can't link to. And then we're going to switch back over to our exercise right here. So as we look at it, exercise 2.1, make a printed presentation of the tenant space project by combining multiple plans on a sheet of paper. And so a lot of this we've covered. These are the previous chapters from the textbook, which take you through everything from creating the floor plan to creating dimensions to being able to put the furniture plan in. Now, we didn't do the electrical plan, so we'll find some other material to place in there, but everything else is pretty good. And so I think what we'll do is, rather than do this reflected ceiling plan, we'll use the kitchen elevation in that. As we look at, the other instructions, it just kind of goes through some cleanup work and some layering, and then it goes through how to use this layout wizard. Once it goes through creating the layout wizard, it has you set up the scale within the viewports and to use this layout wizard, which we'll go through. But the way we've got the assignment set up, we're going to go through and cover these learning objectives with the file that we just downloaded. So with that, I'm going to bring it back to the steps here where it starts with this layout wizard. And I'm going to go into the drawing. And we're going to take a look at this. And so here we have our blocks that we created with our attributes. And then over here we have our floor plan where those blocks have been inserted with those attributes. And if we've done things correctly, we have these things on different layers. When we click on the first tab for the tenant space floor plan, we want to create a floor plan for that. And let's go to the second tab because I thought the instructions are better on this one. So on the second tab, it says create 2 viewports for the kitchen cabinets, front elevation, side elevation, scale upon, and update the details. And so I'm going to just take this information and move it off to the side. And then Al, do you want to walk me through the way we're going to do this, or should I just do it on my own?
No, that's fine. Whatever you want to do, that's fine. Ready?
Okay. So if we decide to put in the viewports, what I've done is I've set the layer for viewports as active, and the layer color is black. And so that is the current layer. And then if we go to the view command, why don't you walk me through it? We'll do it the Harry Potter way.
Go to tools, please. And you want to find Harry Potter, who used to be a wizard. Go down to wizards, and then you go right over, move over to the right, and it says create layouts. You left click on it, and you want to name it. Now they gave a special name for it, I believe, which was what? I forgot what it was, Joe.
Yeah, let's back up on this because they're having us do a layout. Let's come back to the Harry Potter thing. Let's just do it Joe's way. I'm going to cancel out of this, and I'm just going to go through and I'm going to do the cabinet elevation. And to do that, straightforward way, we'll do the wizard on the next tab. What we do is to select viewport and then one viewport. And so the idea behind putting in viewports is that you kind of manage the content from model space in these layouts. And so we can create a layout viewport just like that. And then we can double click in that viewport, and then we can bring up the detail that we want. And so in this viewport, we want the kitchen elevation from the front view. And what we do is we get that relatively close in size, and then we go over here and we dial in, and we start with, let's try 1/8 of an inch equals a foot. And that's much too small. And so then we'll bring it up to 1/4. Still small, let's go up to 1/2. 1/2 looks about right. And so if we put this in at 1/2 an inch equals a foot, we're good. And then as far as anything else goes, everything looks fine. There's not too much information we want to freeze out, but I'm going to lock the viewport at 1/2 equals a foot. And it's important to lock the viewport, or otherwise every time you start working in the viewport, think of it as a better way to manage all the content. By working in the viewports, you can freeze out the layers you don't want. And so, for example, I really don't need this red layer, whatever that layer is, and it's the annotated dimension layer. So part of viewport layering is to freeze that out. And so what I can do is, while I'm in the viewport, I'll check which layer that's on. It's on the anno dims dimension layer. And then I'll go over here and I'll find the annotated dimension layer. And I'll hit this freeze in current viewport. And what that'll do is it'll freeze that layer. There it goes. And then we can also do the same for these other layers. And so we can take out this text layer. Again, we can go and find that layer, and then we can freeze that out. And that just cleans it up a little bit. Maybe we'll keep that in there. I think I like it better with it. So I'm going to undo that. We can leave the detail bubble. And then if we want to, I can unlock that and just scooch it down just enough so that we can see that detail. And then I'll lock it again. And then the second part would be to create another layer next to it, or another viewport next to it. So we double click out into the viewport or into the paper space. And one technique is to copy the viewport and then just be able to set the visibility or what's inside of it. Another way would be to create a new one. We'll just create a new one at this time. And so we'll create one viewport, and I'll just kind of track over here like this. And then bring that, I can track over here like that if I really want to make it nice and perfect. And then I'll double click in the viewport and I'll bring up the side elevation. And then I'll set that viewport at, Al, do you remember what my scale was on that?
Inch 1 foot.
1/2 inch equals a foot. There we go. And then I'll line that up. Now it's not quite big enough, and so I'll double click outside of the viewport, and then I'll just stretch the viewport over a bit so that I can get the text in there. Double click in the viewport, move it over. Scale is set and locked. And so I can then double check my details. Cabinet elevation, 1/2 equals 1. Perfect. 1/2 equals 1. Fill out the title block and complete that information. And then if we look at the next page, the next page says to create one viewport for the furniture installation, and then to use the viewport layering to freeze out the dimension layer. Set the scale in the viewport, and then add a circular detail in an additional layout page. So I'm going to click on this, and I'm going to bring this over to the side. And I'll hit escape. Again, I'll be on the viewport layer, and I'll create a viewport. view. And maybe this is a good place because we had talked about doing this kind of the Harry Potter way. Why don't we go ahead and do that with the Harry Potter viewport wizard? Because I think I'm just going to do the same thing I did on the last one.
You want multiple viewports or just one?
Well, I would probably put 2 viewports on it. We could always show how to add a circular viewport afterwards.
Okay. Now let's go over to tools, please. We go down to where it says wizards, please.
And why don't we just do 4 viewports, Al? We could probably tool around in all the viewports and just demonstrate it.
Okay. Go down to wizards, please, Harry Potter. And go create layouts, please. Now at this time you name it, whatever name they're calling out for it, please. Whatever you name it. 4 and 1, whatever. And if you select on next, please. Now it's asking us printer, and what you have to do is now choose it. If you want to choose a printer that you have currently, that's really nice. But unfortunately, a lot of times you bring your portable notebook or tablet or whatever the case be with you, and their printer is not exactly the same. You have to sometimes jump through hoops to get it to work. So a lot of times what we like to do is select on none, please, on top, and select on next. Now it should say paper size, and the paper size of B size paper we're working on right now. Normally we run off of 36 by 24, so but we're going to go 17 by 11. Now there. That's B size paper. We want to go inches, not millimeters at the present time. You want to select on next, please. And now we want to choose either horizontally or vertically. Horizontally would be one, the top one, and horizontal will be the one below. We want to go horizontally instead of vertical. We want to select on next, please. And title, we want to go into it says B size paper right there. There's the one we're looking at. Okay, and we'll say next, please. And at this time, you have a choice of either doing style you like to, or it's on array. An array will give you how many you're looking for. It will ask you 2, 3, 4, whatever the case be.
Yeah, let's do it with the array like the textbook did for the first time. We can do it again with another one.
Okay, click on array. I was going to say that. Okay, now an array, it's asking us how many we have on rows and columns over there. Now, if we want 2 rows and 2 columns, that will be fine. If you want 3 or more, or 2 and 1, or whatever it be, you choose it. Now, the numbers next to it on the right-hand side is spacing between the viewports that currently will come up. And you put down 0, that means they will touch each other perfectly. If not, you can put a space in which one it's up to you, however you want to do it. The one right above it is scale to fit. We want to click on that arrow going down. And now we want to figure out what we want to do. I believe it's 1/2 inch to a foot, I believe we did it. So you go down to a 1/2 inch to a foot, I believe, right? Would give it that size. I would go 1/8 of an inch maybe.
Well, it's bigger because the kitchen cabinets fit inside of it. And so I would go with maybe 1/4 to start off with. If it
Fine.
doesn't look right, we can always go back and fix it.
Okay, pick it.
Well, again, we're doing 4 of them. So you're right. Since we're doing 4 separate viewports, it's going to need to be really small. Let's try a 16th.
Okay, whatever. I was going to say 8, but 16th is fine.
An 1/8 will be fun. Let's try an 1/8. 1/8 or 16th. What do you think, Al?
It's up to you, however you want to do it.
1/8 it is.
Okay, and select on next, please. Now, next is somewhat important. It's going to ask us from point to point. You're going to go from corner to corner to fill in the area that you have currently there. So we're going to select on it, please, up on top. And see the paper size?
Yeah, it shows the D size title block sheet in here, so there's a glitch. I'll shrink it down, but I'll come in here with just this is what we were looking to do. And then I'll hit finish. and then I'll fix it. And so to fix it, so I put the 4 viewports in of the floor plan, and it actually worked quite well. The only problem was that the title block glitched. And so what I'll do is I'll select the title block and I'll scale it. And so I'm going to hit escape and I'm going to say scale. And I'm just going to make sure I get the whole thing. And I'll click this part and then I'll just make it like that. And I'll move it over. So I think there's a little glitchiness with the layout, but I think we're okay. I don't think it's the deal breaker. It doesn't necessarily keep us from getting the assignment done.
And then at times you want to zoom up at top left corner, please. Click on it, please. Double left click in there. In the box itself.
So that's it right there. Now, one trick that I'll use when I can't see things is I'll change the color of the viewports. And so it's black and there's black lines. So what I'll do is I'll make the color of the viewports red if I can. Come on. I have to click on it down here. There we go. And by making them red, you'll see the edge of the viewport better. And so there they are. Okay. And since the title block was drawn on the viewport layer, it turned red too, but don't let that bother you.
So if you want to pick out one of those, it's going to be changed.
Yeah, so the viewport scale is a little bit off, you know, so if we double click in this one and we dial it down from 1/8 down to 3/32, we get a lot more. We can kind of get some of the dimensions in there. If we go down to 1/16, it'll probably be perfect. And so I'm going to change these to 1/16 by clicking in them. And that's how you do it nowadays. It used to be if you didn't have the right size paper, you had to go get another piece of paper and start all over again when we drew with a pencil. So now we have all the viewports set up and I fixed the title block. And now we can talk about viewport layering within the viewports. And so if I go into this viewport right here, what I want to do is I want to lock it because everything will move otherwise. And so we'll lock it. Go ahead, Al.
And then you want to choose which one you want to see it in that view.
Right. And so the way you start working with these on an interior design level is you have this big model in model space. And then when you start doing the presentation type work, what you'll do is you'll filter what layers you want to see with viewport layering. So we can double click in here. And then what I do is I click on the layer I don't want to see. I don't want to see this layer annotated dimensions. And so then while I'm in that layer, while I'm in paper space, I'll go to that annotated dimension layer and I will turn it off in the viewport. And so it freezes it in the viewport and you can see it disappears. And then in the second viewport, if we wanted to go through and maybe have, let's say a detail of something, let's say we want to start off with the president's office. We can go and I'm going to just click out of the viewport because I haven't set the scales on them. And I can go and get that set. And maybe I'll use a larger scale because people may want to measure the room for the president's furniture. And so we'll bump that one up to 1/8 of an inch equals a foot. And then we can do the same thing where we can go through and we can freeze out the layers that we don't want. And so we want to get rid of this annotated dimension layer. And notice it's different for each viewport. And so the layers are locked into the different viewports. Now, some of the other furniture, as far as being able to see that, as long as they're on the same layer, they're going to be visible. But if we wanted to take the furniture out, we could certainly do that. We can click on one of the layers and see what layer it's on, iFurniture. I can hit escape, and then I can go and freeze out the iFurniture layer. And that's good. We can go through and create details for that. And then once I have everything the way I want it, I can lock that viewport. And then over on this layer, we could have no furniture and dimensions. And so we can click on this layer. I'm going to leave the scale and I'm going to lock it. And then I'm going to turn off the furniture layer. And that's a nice scalable viewport. And then if I don't need this one, I can delete it out. And we can walk through how to create like a custom detail of like a circular or a polygon shaped viewport. And so while we're in Paperspace, I can create a circle, and you can really do some nice artistic type things with viewports. You don't have to have squares. You can take this layers and turn them off so you don't see them. The objects will appear to kind of float in Paperspace. And so one thing we can do is to put this on a different layer. And so if I go here and I put this on layer 0, because I'm going to turn off the other layers, I'd probably make a layer called viewport 2. And then if I want to not see these other viewports in Paperspace, part of the key is knowing how to manage between Paperspace and model space. I can just turn them off. And since I'm on the current layer, I say turn off the current layer. But I have to remember that when I did that, it turned off the title block as well. So let's undo that. We'll leave that. But that's just an example of how you could have those things kind of floating. To create a viewport out of an object while you're in Paperspace, you'll go to View, Viewports, Object. Now you can create polygon shaped viewports, so you can make some really cool splines and any kind of a shape. But we can say Viewport Object, and then we just click on it. And then we could go through and we could double click in that viewport, and we could put maybe our information for some of our furniture. So I can set that up. If I want to, I can dial in a scale, probably 1 inch equals a foot, not quite.
A quarter inch should work.
I think you're right. Usually you are, Al. There we go. And so that's kind of a quick rundown on how to work with these different viewports, sort of taking what the textbook does and sort of just going into layman's terms with it. All right, with that, that's how we wanted to work with our demonstration today. Is there more that we want to add to this, Al, while we're doing the recording?
I don't think this present time. No.
So as we look at the chapter, for chapter 12, we walked through how to create a layout with the wizard and set up 4 single viewports. And so when we worked with creating the viewports in our, what we call Harry Potter, we pulled up our title block. Our title block needed to be scaled, but that was not a big deal. And what it does is it runs the page setup manager and goes through and creates everything for you. But we're at a point now where I think we can kind of understand what it's doing. And so what we do is we can go through and set up these different viewports, and then the viewport layering. Being able to fill out a title block should be no problem for us. And then it goes through this viewport freezing properties. Now, the easiest one is to use the current viewport. And so while you're in the viewport, you can freeze it, but it has the ability to create a bunch of viewports at once and freeze all of them in other viewports. So don't worry too much about the new viewport freezing. It's just an automated way of doing the same thing. And so they go through and they create this layout, just like we did, one with dimensions, one with the furniture plan, and then this one without dimensions. We just did one with a kitchen elevation instead. We scaled and centered. And so we went through and set the scales up on the viewports. They're doing something with annotation scale, not a big thing. And then they go through these basically just moving the viewports around and setting them up. They also turned off the viewport layer. As you can see, there's no lines representing the viewports. And then they made 4 separate ones. And so you can just go ahead and add a viewport tab, and you can make a viewport with the floor plan and the dimensions. You can make another one with the furniture plan. You can put the kitchen plan in place of the electrical, and then you can have another one without dimensions. You're welcome to rename the tabs. You just right click on them and change the names. And then the last thing that it goes through is how to go through this MD setup for the title block, which I don't think we necessarily need to do for that. I think this kind of covers what we wanted to. So with that, I'm going to stop at that point. We'll talk about sheet sets. Sheet sets are basically automated print options. And so what you can do is you can set something up so that when your secretary pulls up the floor plan drawing for, let's say you're doing something for Best Buy and you've gone through and designated how everything is going to be laid out, you can just go through and run the project where it already has all the printing options set up, so that once you get everything set up for the presentation layouts, you just go through the sheet set manager and it prints it like a book. So you can build a Best Buy in Libertyville, and then when you go through and you have another Best Buy that's going to be at another location, you can just go ahead and run the prints, and everything is pretty much the same way as it was in the last one.
Except for address.
That would be the point. So that's basically the chapter 12. It goes through, if you want to do some other things, they take some of our previous projects and do the same thing, just different viewports, not real hard, just use viewport layering. And it's a good way to manage how to control the visibility without having all these layers that you constantly turn on and off, because by doing it this way, you're able to then go through and then you can just click on these individual layout tabs and be able to set those things up. And I got let's get whoops. Here we go. And so you have these different viewports and different types of layouts that you can go through and set up. Here's our kitchen elevations. And then this one I didn't use, so I'm just going to right click on it and I can delete it. And then lastly, let's say that we wanted to do one with just the furniture itself. And so I'm going to rename this one. And I'm just going to say office furniture. And then if I wanted to put the office furniture in, it's kind of the same technique. I'm not going to use the wizard. I'm just going to go with view, viewport. I'm on the viewport layer. And so I'll go viewport, and let's make a bunch of viewports. I think maybe the way to do this would be to do, why don't we use the viewport wizard on this? Well, no, because it'll have me go through and do a lot of stuff. We'll do it the hard way. Viewport, and what I'll do is I'll just do one small viewport. And then I'll double click inside the viewport and I'll get some furniture, my first piece. And my plan is to put most of the furniture kind of in like an array here. And so I can go through and I can come up with a scale for that. 1/8, I think we said.
Yes.
Perfect. And then typically, you'll put, you'll update this down here to be 1/8. What it does is it keeps you from having to redraw all the details. If I made any changes to that workspace, this desk, then it would automatically be updated. And then what you can do is you can just copy these and then change the availability or what's inside of it. So I can go like this. And then I can do that again. since I kind of got those in a nice neat row. And then I can go into each viewport, set the scale, and lock. And then I can go over here and I can get the next item. And then I can lock that. Next item. Now this one I might need to make the viewport scaling a little bigger. And you could note that with the detail underneath it.
And every time you change the size or scale of each one of the viewports, you want to note it someplace on or inside the viewport itself. That way, when somebody comes over and wants to measure it, instead of just looking at it and take your word for it, they can set the scale to what they need to measure off of it.
Right. It's best to kind of keep them all the same. But on the other note, this one got so small. And maybe what we would do is put the larger pieces of furniture in a row over here and then, just copy the detail bubbles over. And it works really great for three-dimensional aspects. It really kind of pops when you can have some additional things like, an isometric view that's kind of rendered out. And so it does very well for, just kind of selling the concepts and the ideas. So that's kind of it. You can work with the existing file. This was made for the demonstration so that we can tell people how to work with these viewports and viewport layering. Al, is there anything else that we want to add to our demonstration lecture today?
No, that's about it. I just want to make sure that everybody understands that we have the final coming up. That ends on the 16th of December. And we have to have everything in by that point.
Sounds good. So I'm going to stop the recording and then we're going to open things up for questions. So stop recording. And with this exercise, again, this is just a demonstration of how to work with the chapter. This is the last exercise that is due for the course. And the other parts, as far as the final exam, we'll talk about after I end the recording. Okay, that ends this lecture.